Hello, I'm Annette André. I'm an actress of decades. This is a video of my life, and I do hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
So Annette, it's lovely to meet you at your home today, and thanks for inviting me in. We're going to start with the Whatever Happened To series, where I will ask you 25 quickfire questions.
Okay.
So let's start with question number 1. What is your full name given at birth?
Annette Christine Andriallo.
And when is your birthday and the year of your birth?
Oh, 1939, 24th of June. Midsummer's Day, or midwinter in Australia, where I was born.
Which is the very next question. As a child, where were you born and raised?
In Australia, in Sydney.
If any, how many brothers or sisters did you have growing up?
None, just me.
What's your earliest memory of going to the cinema or the theatre?
The cinema was Bambi. And when it came to the really sad bit, my mother put her hands over my eyes. That's how I remember it so well. But that was the first thing I think I saw in cinema. And the theatre, I don't remember, but it would have been the ballet.
Great. And growing up as a child, did you have a favourite actor or actress? Maybe a radio star at the time?
No, growing up, you're talking about childhood and up. No, because I was in ballet. And so my figures that I went to, were ballet dancers. Margot Fonteyn and a lot of our Australian ballet dancers, which were wonderful, and a lot ended up in England, So it was ballet that really filled my life back then.
Was there an actual event or trigger that first prompted you to seriously consider acting or maybe dancing as an actual profession? And how old do you think you were at the time?
All right. To begin with, ballet was my utmost ambition. At age 15, I was invited to join the Australian Ballet Company, which was, and it was a wonderful company. I went to the rehearsals. We went just to watch for the first couple of weeks. And I went with about 4 others who were chosen to watch. And at the second one I was at, a couple of people came out and said, "Excuse me, could you come back to the office with us for a minute?" And I did. And they looked at me and they said, "We're terribly sorry. We can't have you in the ballet company." I looked up, I couldn't believe it. I said, "Why?" They said, "Because you have to be 16 before it's legitimate." And he said, "You've got a whole year to go." And I was just punched in the stomach. So I went away and I suppose cried. And I went back to ballet classes for a while. And then one day I was walking around, after a ballet class, I was walking around town, and I stopped and I thought, how do I know that in a year's time they're going to want me? That they haven't got already someone with my particular style, whatever they have. Do they want anyone at all? I could be left again. And I thought, that's not going to happen. So I went home to my mother, I said, "That's it, it's done, finished." And she looked at me and she said, "What?" I said, "But don't worry, Mum. I'm going to kick up my legs on the stage no matter what." And that's what started me going to plays and then radio, which was big out there at the time, and on from there.
Did you ever attend a stage school or audition, study, or formally train to be an actress anywhere?
I did. To begin with, even before all of this, my mother loved to hear good speaking voices. her own mother had come from an English mother, and so there was, you know, my family had quite modulated tones. And so she'd had me attend elocution classes, and I'd actually won a medal at one point. So there was that, and then one of the nuns at my school, she loved theatre and things, and she always used to enjoy my telling her about dancing and showing her this. And she said to me, when I told her this, she said to me, you know, I can help you. I said, why? She said, I know a woman who runs a radio school. She said, learn all the techniques, and she said the actors go to her. She said, I know her. I bet I can get you into the school, and she did. Radio was the big thing then. We didn't have television, and we had theatre. So that got me into radio when I did her classes, and then I got into radio. Then I was also doing some sort of semi-amateur theatre plays. They were more professional than, and that started everything off, started the ball rolling, and then I just had to work on my lack of confidence and knock on people's doors.
Either before you began your acting career, or maybe when you were between roles at any point throughout your career, what other non-acting jobs have you ever done?
Oh, in Christmas time, when we took jobs once I was, you know, over 16, at Christmas time we used to do 2 or 3 somewhere. You could get a job, pick up a job to make some money for Christmas. I worked in a shoe store. I hated everybody because I hated all these people wanting dozens of shoes to try. I do it, but they shouldn't do it. And then I worked in a shop which had lay-by. Do you know what lay-by is?
No.
Oh, you buy something and then you keep it, stays there, but you pay it off over a period of months.
Oh, okay.
And then you can and it was so deadly dull. And one of the guys who were working there kept chasing me around the shelves and things, which I didn't like at all, because I didn't like him. That was it. Before I got into acting. Yeah, that was all I did.
And what about during any downtime? Have you ever done any work to pay the bills?
Yeah. What I used to do when I was really working, and before in Australia I worked as a waitress, doing daytime, and then I remember doing some theatre at night, and I'd go back to the restaurant to do the suppers for a bit, and I'd walk into town instead of getting the tram, and I'd get whatever it was. So I did that, and I didn't ever take a job here. I think once I needed to do something, and I worked in a sort of fabric shop, and it was for a brief time. But other than that, I really mostly was all my work related.
So what was your first ever paid acting performance, i.e. your professional debut? And again, how old were you?
Well, my first one, after I gave ballet up, and once I was 16, I was in a production of Blue Moon. I think it's called Blue Moon. It was at the time a known a known musical. But I went in as a dancer. I didn't have a speaking role, but I went in as one of the dancers in the thing. And then, I had an understudy job at one of a professional one, understudying Delinquent, the Dear Delinquent, I think it's called. And Robert Helpman, I think, had directed it, although he wasn't there. I understudied the girl, the lead, who was Rona Newton-John, who was, what's her name, Newton-John's?
Olivia
Newton-John's sister.
Oh, sister.
I never met Olivia. I think that was all, really, that I did before really getting...
And your first part with dialogue, was that as Cobweb in A Midsummer Night's Dream?
Yeah, that was, yeah.
So that was your first paid acting part with lines?
Yeah, I suppose. We must have been paid for it, I suppose. It was a very short run, you know, it was... and I was, what was I, aged 8 or 9? So that when they did that sort of thing, there was it must have been done during holidays time, and we were allowed to do that because it necessitated, you know, that age thing. But it wasn't a long-running thing.
As one that attends film conventions, Annette, can you remember how old you were or what production you were working on when someone first asked you for an autograph?
I have no idea. I haven't. You're asking me to go back a lot of years. No, I can't remember. Because in theatre, I mean, if you're a big star, people would be waiting outside. And I wasn't a big star at the time. I did some nice little, you know, but then till television hit, people, well, maybe it was in Australia, they didn't do that very much, as far as I know back then.
And did you put much thought into the construction of your autograph? Because you've got quite a stylish signature.
I worked on it because I wanted to make it different. And also you really got to find a way of doing where you can do it. And I wanted it to be legible without being completely. Some of them are just like, that's it. And I thought, no, I want it to be, because there's nice things you can do with A's. Yeah, so, yeah, I worked on it a bit, thinking I might get one.
At any point in your life of your career, have you ever been starstruck when meeting someone famous? And have you asked anyone for an autograph?
Well, I probably did way back when I was much younger and starting out more. But I was actually, there was someone, I think it might have been Dame Sybil Thorndike. But that was already when I was came over here. It was the first production I did, and I was only playing a very small role. She was lovely, and my memory, no, I don't know about that.
I mean, in terms of being starstruck...
One thing I did, I didn't meet him, but I was absolutely desperately in love with Stuart Granger. And I wrote him several letters, please could you send me some photographs, please? And he did. And years later, can I tell you?
Yeah.
Years later, over here, I was going up to my agent, whoever it was at the time, and we had to walk up a lot of steps. And someone was behind me. And I kept looking around. I looked around with Stuart Granger. I thought, So I kept on going. We got to the top. And as we were going up, he said, I loved your performance in Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. So I turned around and laughed and talked. And I said to him, I sent you so many messages years ago for your photographs. And he said, did I sign them? I said, I have no idea. It was signed. He said, well, I don't know if it was me, but I wish it had been, or something like that. He was sweet.
Well, that moves quite nicely on to the next question, because at any point in your life or your career, have you ever collected any memorabilia, and what, if anything, do you still have in your possession today?
Memorabilia or...
Photographs, programmes...
But of someone, or mine?
Yeah, props.
Well, I don't have them today. I used to have nearly all of my programmes, but in moving several times over the last, how many years, things there was a big house and then there was a slightly small house, and this one's very small. I had to get rid of a lot of things, and I'm afraid I regret it. But in the spur of the moment, I tossed them all.
To perform, what would you choose? Theatre, television, cinema or radio? And what reason would you give for your answer?
I think I would choose theatre. It would depend, of course, on the script. If it were a film script and I liked it more, then I would go for that. But I love theatre, always did. That's how I grew up, in theatre. I love having the pulse from the audience, and you have to vary your character according to the audience in a way, and particularly if it's comedy, so long as you get the laughs. If you don't get the laughs, it's absolute hell.
Which of your parts, performances or characters would you say people remember you for the most?
Oh, I think probably Randall and Hopkirk, Deceased, because that was an ongoing thing, and that goes with the territory, really. And it is a popular series. And I think also The Saint, because I did several of those.
Whether it be for what you did on stage or screen, can you name any of your own individual performances that you are personally the most proudest of or found the most rewarding?
There was one, I won't say it was the most rewarding. I did a short season out of town theatre. I played a streetcar named Desire, and I played the role that Vivian Leigh played, and I'd always wanted to play that role, and I did, and I loved doing it, but the director he just didn't get out of me what I needed to do, you know. So in one way it was sweet because I was playing, but the other was that I just felt I needed someone to really get it out of me, which would have been wonderful. And I think one of the other roles, which wasn't for me what I felt was my best role, it wasn't at all, but I loved working in Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, the movie, because I worked with this huge array of the best comedians, or not comedians, but comedian actors that you could ever imagine. I mean, imagine having Buster Keaton as your father. I mean, you know, we all did this when he walked in. He was wonderful and loved him. And all those other wonderful, Zero Mostel and Phil Silvers, well, or just wonderful. You know, it depends a lot on the cast as well. But of course I wasn't allowed to do any acting. I wasn't supposed to be doing anything much. I just had to float through the whole thing. But it was a great experience and something that I remember, and proud that I was chosen to be in that particular movie. I had Michael Crawford, you know, as my fellow lead, or Juve lead, yes.
Is there a part or role that you still remember today that you auditioned for and really wanted but didn't get?
Yeah, there was. They were auditioning for Where Eagles Dare, which had Clint Eastwood, and I'm trying to remember, was it Richard Burton?
Richard Burton?
I think it was him in Where Eagles Dare. I really wanted to do that. It wasn't the lead, it was the second lead. And I auditioned, pardon me, and I thought I did quite a good test. And he said, well, we'll let you know. And it went on for about 2 weeks. I kept phoning my agent, have you heard anything yet? No, they're still looking at this and they're still looking at that. And I thought, oh. He said, but that may be a good thing. I'm not, you know. And then finally it came through, no, they found someone else. And I thought, oh, no. I really would have liked that because, you know, Richard Burton, Clint Eastwood, all of that. And so that I was turned down with. Not long after that, I went to a party that my then agent was giving. And he was William Morris Agency, so it was a big agency. And he used to invite various people to come. I remember meeting Marlon Brando at one of them and things like that. So I thought, oh yeah, I'll go to one of his parties. And I did, and I'm sitting there, and I could see just a little across the room, Clint Eastwood. And so, you know, I just sat, I was talking to some friends. He got up and he came over to me and he said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but he said, I saw the test. He said, you should have had the part. I thought, oh. And that was quite something. I thought that was, someone had seen and thought, and yeah, I wish I'd have cultivated more of his, you know, getting to know him.
Right.
Because he then went on to direct a lot of movies.
Right. Still on the audition pieces, was there ever a part that you auditioned for, maybe due to other commitments or working elsewhere, but was there ever a part that you actually had to turn down yourself and maybe regretted the decision?
Yes. I don't know, we can always cut this out. Before I left Australia, I auditioned for Salad Days, which was up there, and they wanted me for the narrator in the Salad Days. And I thought, oh, this is a big chance for me, you know, this is great, because I think it was, I think it was English director coming out or something. And I said, I did the audition, and then they called me back and said, we'd like you to do it. And I said, when do we start? And they said, such and such a date. And I said, oh, I can't. I must have known beforehand that I had gotten the part, because my mother had talked to me before that. And I went back to this thing, and he said, we'd like to offer you the part, and I asked the dates. And I said, oh, no, I think there was just before the opening or something. I said, oh, no, I couldn't do that. He said, why not? You're working. I said, no. I said, you see, my close friend is getting married and she's asked me to be the bridesmaid. Oh, this is I'm talking in a professional thing. My mother had said to me, you can't, I obviously known before that they were going to offer it to me. And I told my mother, she said, you can't. You've promised her that you would be her bridesmaid. I said, but Mommy, this is a big job. No, you can't. Oh, can you imagine? I felt like this big when I went, and then I thought of it afterwards. I thought, why didn't I just defy everybody and say, thank you, I'll take the part? I didn't have the courage at the time. I was still quite young, and I've never really lived that down in my mind. I thought I wish I could have gone back and explained.
Parts come and go, friendships last forever, so hopefully your friend appreciated the choice that you made.
I didn't see much of her after that.
So it definitely was the wrong thing to do.
It was the wrong thing to do, absolutely. And the dress I had to wear for her as a bridesmaid was just ghastly. I've still got pictures of it. I look at it, I think, oh my God, what's the matter with me? You do some silly things in your life. There are times.
Now, throughout your book, Annette, you mention many of the co-stars that you've worked with, but I'd like you to name some co-stars that you liked working with the most, and maybe a little bit more controversial, those that you had a tougher time with, namely those that you didn't like.
All right. I worked once with Charlie Drake in a movie that he did, which was an awful movie. But I had this part with him. I hated him. Absolutely hated him. He was a nasty little man. And he kept trying to win me around, and he'd come over sort of, and then he'd tell me about what he'd been doing the night before. And I mean, I was horrified. I was no, saint. I thought, oh, you little weasel. And he had this puffer that he puffed his breath with before, and he always had clammy hands. And I had to do this little love scene thing with him. And I just loathed this man. He was an awful man. I don't try not to talk to people about that, but he was something else. And that I hated every single minute of it. And when the crew knew, and they'd say to me, he used to flick his fingers to get his chap come by, his stand in and things. Flick his fingers like this. I hated people like that.
This is good. We love the dirty stories. Maybe we should spend some more time on this. Who else didn't you like? Maybe some that were not so gracious with you?
Well, in television or theatre you're talking about? Anything.
Any stories?
Well, I think it's well known that I really loathed Patrick McGoohan, Persuaders, in the Prisoner. But in recent times, I don't know that I actually watched the episode because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what it was about. And because he was cold and miserable, and I really didn't like him at all. And he also dressed down the director in front of the whole studio one day, and that I won't tolerate. This director was a lovely man doing his job. So that made an extra thing, But then and he was cold when I worked with him in the scenes. He was one of the actors, which I've had before too, one of those actors who never looks you in the eye. He looks just past you. And that's not easy to work with. But more recently, I've seen the episode a couple of times. And I remember the last time, which was probably a couple of years ago or something, I looked at it and I thought, I actually did good performance there. I hadn't thought I had. And I looked and I thought, I think I know why. Maybe it was advantageous that I didn't like him like that, because it really wanted me to, I really wanted to, stab him. Not quite, but, and I think that picked up my performance. Because he told me one day, he said, you should always work with your head, not with your heart. Oh, yeah, right. Let's see. And so I worked with my heart even more.
So let's not dwell on the negatives. Let's have some positive experiences now. What about those standout co-stars that you really adored working with?
Oh, well, Zero Mostel in Funny Thing. What a lovely man, but what talents, Michael Hordern was in it. Buster Keaton, who was the loveliest man. He was this world-famous comedian, And I've worked with some people I really liked. Now I've got to remember them. There was another one in Funny Thing, and that was, of course, Michael Crawford, who was my, partner in that. And he was wonderful to work with. We got on very well. He was easy. We both he loved doing all his stunts. And I did too, but they usually didn't let me do too many. But in that, we did have it. And we worked together very, very well. So I enjoyed that a lot. And of course, there was Roger Moore that I worked with a lot, and we were great friends for years and years. And I really liked working, because he laughed. He loved to laugh. people who've got a sense of humour, if they haven't got a sense of humour, it's a bit deadly.
Rather than asking you who your favourite director is, or was, I'll ask it in a slightly different way. Outline what a director needs to do to get the best performance out of Annette André.
To begin with, not to be a grim, someone who wants to criticise you all the time. What they've got to do is be on a wavelength with you. And they can be tough, but so long as I understand what they're trying to do is get it out of me. There was an Australian director that I worked with 2 or 3 times before I came over to England, and he had lived in Paris for a long time, so he travelled, and he was very intelligent, and he approached the roles right from the sort of getting through to the character and bringing it out. And I remember one we were doing, and I thought I'd done rehearsed a scene quite well, and I thought, went away feeling a bit, and he called me back. He said, come with me for a minute. What he did was he took me away somewhere, not with everyone else. And then he turned to me and he said, what the bloody hell did you think you were doing in that time? And he ripped me off. I stood there like this, and he said, don't you understand that there's this, I did say to you, if you did this and this. I understood, and I loved him as a director because he had no qualms about saying, what do you think, you can do this. Just think about it this way and do this and do that. Makes a big, big difference. Some directors let you get on with it, particularly in television, because you're pushed for time and all that sort of thing. But there are others who see something more and say, think about it, or just, I don't mind if they stand there and say, what bloody hell do you think you were doing? So long as it's not in front of everybody else, and so long as it's meant the way it should be meant. That's how they get through to me. I've worked with some directors who just let things go by. There was another director called Philip Dudley, who was a television director with, I think, BBC and someone else I think he worked with. And I did several things with him, including an episode of a series called Mickey Dunn. And I don't know what's happened to that series. It seems to have disappeared. When the actor was Dinsdale Landon, who was wonderful. We got on very well in this particular episode, and we had quite an emotional scene, a couple of them towards the end. And we couldn't ever get through the rehearsals with him without, we'd burst into laughter, which was, of course, a defence against letting go. And Philip would get really angry with us. For God's sake, don't you know what, I can't do this, you stop laughing. And of course, we just go off into peals of laughter again. Come the actual performance, we did it, and at the end of the scene, because they cut before they went to the next one, all the crew applauded, and I had tears running down. Everything, it really went so well. But Philip understood that, and there have been other directors. There are directors you just love. One of the episodes of The Saint I did, Roger directed. And I mean, he had such a sense of humour that we did come across some really funny incidents in that, which I've written in the book actually. And of course he would just break down laughing, and I would. And the crew would, and the producer would say, we've got to get on with this. Yes, all right, we'll be there. But no, if you don't have a producer, a director who's strong enough to take you aside and say, you can't do it that way, you must listen, not so that someone that you'll understand. And there are a lot who don't.
And when you received a note from a director, were you always receptive to taking a note, or did that make you a little bit more apprehensive?
It depended on why he was saying that. Was it just because he didn't like that way you were saying it? Or did he really mean that, think about it, perhaps change it a different direction? Just, there are differences between that. Someone just wants to, someone just wants to what's the word I'm looking for? Just show his power. Whereas others have a direct route to get to you. And it may take a little bit of hardness to do it.
It does not need to be any that you appeared in personally, but can you name 3 must-see films that you would tell everyone that they should see at least once in their lifetime?
Yes. The first and foremost that comes to mind is a movie called The Miracle Worker. It should never be missed by anyone. It's actually based on a true story. And the characters are played by Anne Bancroft, who was the teacher that comes in, and Patty Duke, who plays the character of the woman. And she was not quite 13 when she played this. It was the most extraordinary, wonderful performances, both of them, that I think I've ever seen on film. And Patty Duke portrayed the character of Helen Keller, who became a world-known person. She was deaf, dumb, and blind, but highly intelligent, and no one ever realized they treated her like a puppy until this woman got hold of her, and the way they worked together, it was hell on wheels. I mean, this little girl was a maniac. She was terrified. She was not. She was fighting. She knew something was there and didn't know how to express it. And sorry. And so through this teacher, she became a person. I always do this when I'm talking about it. I'm sorry. It
must be a great film that you obviously is so emotive about. I mean, I know the film because they both won an Oscar.
They did
for that, and I think Arthur Penn was nominated for Best Director. So that's a great choice. So that's number 1.
Number 1.
Number 2.
Well, I have a couple, but one of them, I think, this is totally different. But I love musicals, and I think this was such a brilliant movie. It was My Fair Lady, and the performances were lovely. The humour with
Audrey Hepburn.
Yeah, Audrey Hepburn, of course, was wonderful. And singing that song, I loved Audrey Hepburn anyway. But no, who played...
Rex Harrison?
Rex Harrison, that's it. His humour when he sang the songs, but his humour that came out and the wryness of it and the whole thing. I mean, all the performances were just wonderful, and the costumes. That's, I think, one that you can watch many times.
And that scene where he does the elocution lessons, it must have taken you back to your lessons.
Well, not quite. I mean, I didn't talk like that. I mean, Oh, no, I had a sort of soft Australian accent. I didn't really talk like that, I just thought it was an overall wonderful. You can just sit there. I've watched it many times, and it makes you feel good. And the costumes were stunning, Beaton did the costumes, and I thought that was just fabulous. And there was another one, what was it? Oh, of course, Casablanca. An old film, black and white lighting, which was wonderful. Humphrey Bogart, and I think it was Claude Rains who played the inspector. Well, I mean, they worked together so very well. And it was a great story, and they had that wonderful theme music in it. The theme music was...
As time goes by, right?
Time goes by.
Yeah.
As time goes by, yeah. When you listen to the song, you know immediately where it came from. And I think music's very important. Maybe you want to ask me about that later.
So, for the purposes of those watching this video, the three choices are The Miracle Worker, My Fair Lady, and Casablanca.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. There are a lot more, but they always come to mind.
Now, again, another left field one, and maybe a little bit of a fun one for you now, Annette. You're hosting an intimate dinner party, and you can invite 3 guests to come along, alive or dead, in the profession, outside of the profession. Which 3 people would you invite, and why?
One comes to mind especially. I have no idea why. I always wanted to meet Al Pacino. I just found him fascinating. Sometimes he had these moods, and he could drift from being a rather sort of mean, ugly little, and to suddenly becoming extremely attractive. And you say, yeah, I'd like to meet you. But there were other things. I can't really describe it. His performances were always interesting, whether you agreed with them or not. He would go over the top sometimes and not. I just found him mercurial, interesting, and there were times when he became, for me anyway, very attractive. I thought, but I think I would have been a little scared of meeting him. I think I would have thought, how do I deal with this one? It's that sort of thing. So I would have Al Pacino. And then there are 2 people, well, there are a lot of others, but 2 people come to mind. They always have. I would have loved to have met George Adamson, who was depicted in the movie Born Free. I worked with the Born Free Foundation, volunteer work, so did my husband, we did, for the Born Free Foundation for years, actually, in a volunteer capacity. We used to go through zoos and places like that to just see what the conditions were, and we'd report back, etc., etc. Both of us were animal activists. So I would have loved to have met him, because I think he would have been a lovely man, and what he did with those lions was just brilliant. And the other one was again animals, and that was Daphne Sheldrake. Did you know of her?
No.
Daphne Sheldrake. She and her husband had owned him, but he died much younger, and she kept on. They used to rescue elephants, particularly baby elephants that had been deserted or ones that were found injured. And she had a huge sanctuary, and I can't remember which, it was Kenya, but somewhere outside of Nairobi, a big park that was there. And they had this sanctuary, and what they did was brilliant. Never met her. I never got to do that. But she died, I don't know, I think about 2018 or something like that. But it still goes on. It is still a sanctuary and is well thought of, and it's one of the best. They do elephants and rhinos. And I've seen quite a few documentaries on it. And oh, it's just so wonderful to see them bringing in these baby elephants that sometimes are almost dead. And a lot of the time they got them again and they became wonderful grown elephants who would come back to the camp, you know. I mean, animals just attract me.
Bringing it back to you now, Annette. Obviously you've done the memoir. Your career is, I would say, probably well documented online. But tell us something about you or your career that most people would not know. I mean, are you passionate about any topics, subjects, hobbies, pastimes?
Oh, well, I had hobbies and pastimes. Yeah, one of my great things was horse riding. I adored horses from the minute I was born, I think, and finally got to ride them for quite a few years. Not competing, I just liked to ride for pleasure and you know, to be with the horses. I played tennis and I wasn't very sporty. I couldn't, I mean, people would throw me a ball and I'd drop it. But I could run and I could jump. I could do that. Hobbies, I didn't have a lot of time. I used to love, as I suppose you could call it a hobby, designing. I used to design when I was out of work sometimes. Different things, sort of sometimes some pieces of clothing, I'd design them, and occasionally I'd sell something, which was quite fun. And art, I love art. I do still do that, I paint. But I always used to like to draw and fiddle around with things like that, pastels and water paints and things. Anything to do creative, I think, I really enjoyed.
So bringing it back to your career, Annette, you've enjoyed such a great career. When you reflect back on the career that you've had, what are your overarching memories on the career that you've had? How would you like to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered specifically that I gave good performances, that I was more than just a standard actress, because I think I was. And I know people liked my looks, but that isn't the reason I want to be an actress. So I would like them to remember me as that. I'd also like to remember that I had a good sense of humour and I did love to laugh. As I started out being very shy, very terrified about a lot of things. But gradually over the years I got more confidence. And I think when I married Arthur, my husband, who was a writer and from New York and Jewish and with a fabulous sense of humour, that he pulled out better parts of me and gave me much more confidence in being able to speak as I am speaking now. You know, whether it's sensical or not, I don't know, but he just gave me more confidence in myself, and that I didn't have for many years. I had to cloak it, you know. In fact, one of the things I couldn't do was I couldn't swim. And that was because of when I was young, the doctors wouldn't allow me to swim because of a problem I had. And so water terrified me. And I found the best way, if I was nervous about going into a room and meeting new people, having to read everything and, you know, or audition, do anything like that, I would spend a few minutes and I'd think of myself on the diving board, a high diving board, and I'd go 1, 2, 3, jump. And I'd jump into the water and I'd open the door and walk in, or whatever I had to do, or start, reading from a script. But I lacked confidence for many, many years. One time that gave me a little bit of hope when I was quite young, I think it was just early on when I was over here, there was an actor, comedian over here whom I knew because he'd worked in Australia, and we'd become quite friendly. And he was a big Irishman, But he said to me one day, you've got to get more confidence. And he said, you've got to learn when you go out, because I used to go out with him sometimes. Well, I was fine with him, but with other people, not so good. And he said to me, you've got to learn to talk to people. You must talk. You've got to be out there. You're an actress. You've got to bring it out. And I said, oh. Anyway, one day he said to me, get dressed up. He said, tomorrow night I'm taking you out to dinner. I said, oh, okay, right. And he said, it's going to be a nice one with some other people. I said, all right. So we went. Shirley Bassey and her agent and a couple of other people. And I was seated next to Shirley. I mean, it was... I looked at him and he went, talk. And so I had her agent on one side of me, who was rather, Mike Sullivan, I remember his name was. And he was very sort of, confident and all of that. I'm like, oh God, I'm going to die. I want to go under the table. But he talked to me and I managed to talk back. I didn't know what to say to Shirley. And I must have conjured up something or other, and we sort of had a bit of a chat, but I wasn't too good. And when we finished that, we went home. He said, why didn't you talk? I said, I didn't know what to talk about. I didn't know. And I'm sitting next to Shirley Bassey. And I think we went out one more time with them. I think it was one more time. And I was much better. Not great, but somewhat better. I think he'd had to talk with her first, actually. So that, but I was very bound up with. I used to put on my sort of, I'm a very unique person. I'm rather cold to be with, because to stop people coming up to me and talking. Until one day an actress said to me, I did a turn, and she was in Australia. She was a very well-known and very good actress out there, an older woman. And one day she said something to me, and I just sort of answered her, and she looked at me and she said, why are you always so cold with me? And I said, but I'm not cold. I said, I'm shit scared of you. And she burst out laughing. She said, well, I'm scared of you because of this person. From then on, we got on very well.
So, going back to your career, when you look back, are you pleased with the career that you've had? Are there any regrets when you think back?
No, do you know, I'm pleased with the way my life has gone and my career. My only regret is that I didn't push hard enough to go further and get better. And the other one is, I wish I'd have done more to further my theatre career. I could have done some more things, and I didn't. I opted for the other choice of a quick job or something. But I think I was so insecure for so many years. I think I did reasonably well, but I could have done better. And that irks me a bit, because you let it go and then suddenly it's a bit too late. So I figured I didn't. Next time I come though, next time I'm back here, which I will be, it will be much, much better, because I will go the same route. I intend to be another actress in the future, bigger, better and brighter, as they say in the commercials.
Now, you may have been cast predominantly early on because of your looks. You're very attractive on screen. But do you think that there was a turning point in your career where casting directors or directors were seriously looking at you as an actress rather than for how you may appear on screen?
I think it occurred a few times during my career, even earlier on. When I remember a director who asked me for me. And I think someone said to him once, why do you go for her? So he said, I'm always looking for another Vera Miles. She was a film star who she never got big, but she was got quite up there. She was known. And I thought, it wasn't the top person, but I thought, he sees me as something better. And I liked that. And then I didn't actually get that from others, but I knew from a couple of other directors that I worked with that they knew I had more to give. But they didn't quite know perhaps how to get it out of me. I just needed someone to help me turn that corner, you know? And I don't think I did it quite myself, but I got to a reasonable way. I would have wanted to go further, and I wanted to go longer. Who knows? Maybe someone will call me tomorrow. Hello, we need an old lady.
So, bringing us completely up to the present day, Annette. How do you occupy oneself? I mean, do you go to the theatre, cinema now or not?
I don't really go to the cinema. You know, I think COVID paid that. I used to go to the cinema a lot, and with my husband we used to go. And I used to go on my own. You know, I love the cinema, but I haven't been since then. And there's so much that plays on television now, you can get up a lot of things. So I tend to do that. Theatre I love, but I'm here and my family's right near. But they've got their, you know, 2 teenage kids and everything else. My friends are mostly gone, or they're living too far away. I've got some in America and things. And I just love the theatre, but, you know, sort of getting yourself there on your own is not as easy to do. And given someone said to me, well, let's go to the theatre, and I'd be there in a minute. It's opportunity, I think, and stages of your life. But if I could meet up with some people who enjoyed that, I'd be off in a minute. Yeah, and cinema. But I'm not too sure that there's a lot of movies I want to see today. There's a whole lot that just is not my cup of tea. And except for one recently, and that was called Conclave. God, that was a wonderfully produced, acted, everything sort of film. It was just terrific.
So let me close out with my final question, bringing us right to the present day, Annette. Finish the sentence. What happened to the Randall and Hopkirk deceased actress, Annette André?
Annette André, the Randall and Hopkirk deceased, amongst many others, actress, is still here and will be here and will stay here, and hopefully might even give you a little bit more. But can you put it out to the producers and the directors and the casting directors, please? Tell them I'm available. I'm available. Whoa.
Annette André, thank you very much.
You're welcome.